just so not my thing. I think I would rather carve out my own corneas with a razor blade I fished out of the Ganges. Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name's Charlotte, and a few days ago I did a reacting to the Women's Prize Longlist video, and today I am following that up by basically trying the first chapter of all 16 books on the long list and ranking them so that you don't have to. Hopefully this provides some sort of guidance as to what book may be best suited to you. I should also say before I get going that if you would like to sample these books before buying them yourself, or maybe you have a reservation at the library which doesn't come in yet for another couple of weeks, then what I do is basically I download the sample of the book of the ebook off of Amazon, and that basically allows you to read the first 10% of any novel that you want. And I tend to find that within the first 10% of a book I can know roughly, based on maybe the writing or the plot, how interested I am in that book, and therefore how suitable that book will be for me going forward, and whether I'm going to really enjoy reading the rest of it or not. So yeah, if you also fancy sampling these for yourself, or maybe you hear of one or two that I talk about that you'd like to follow up, then I thoroughly recommend doing that as a free alternative to maybe waiting several weeks for the library reservation to come in, or, as I say, spending your cash at this moment in time. The first book that I want to talk about is Glory by Noviolet, Bulawayo, possibly one of the most famous books on this list because it was shortlisted for the Booker Prize the year just gone. And so I am very much in the camp of DNFing this book and not enjoying it. I felt like it was a conceptual misfire. I don't think that the animals worked. I thought they were incredibly two-dimensional as characters. I thought it was incredibly verbose to the point of slowing down the narrative, and in addition to actually the just excessive amount of repetition. And so it was 400 pages plus of a lot of the same stuff, and I DNF this along with a lot of book people on BookTube. I don't think this book was incredibly well received in general, and so I don't expect it to do very well on the Women's Prize list this year. It probably will get shortlisted, but I hope it doesn't go on to win. I don't think this book deserves it, quite frankly. The next book I want to talk about is Cursed Bread. This is written by Sophie Macintosh, and I read Sophie Macintosh's The Water Cure several years ago, which is more of a dystopian. This one I don't believe is dystopian, but it certainly follows that almost ethereal, not quite sure what's going on thing. The plot to The Water Cure was fairly loose. I did enjoy it, and I think I gave it something like 3.5 stars in the end. But on reading the Cursed Bread, that it is very similar in its approach, in that it is very loose. I read the first chapter and the plot is set up well. I can see where this is going, but I'm almost not enjoying that I can see where this is going. There's a woman who's the wife of a baker. There's a very rich woman who's kind of outside the village in a big fancy house and is very alluring to this baker's wife. And so it kind of, I've only read the first chapter, but it feels like a foregone conclusion that there's going to be some sort of lesbian love affair going on there, because the baker's wife has quite an infatuation with her, as well as the bread being cursed and people will be poisoned throughout the village through this. What I feel, and what a lot of the reviews I've seen on Goodreads feel, is that there isn't enough actual plot, enough meat in this plot to actually sink your teeth into. It's too wishy-washy, it's too vague, it's abstract, and some people are going to love that, and on Goodreads you will see that reflected in kind of 5-star reviews and then 2-star reviews. So I think the writing is fine, but for me it just wasn't hitting the right note, and because it feels like a foregone conclusion, it's not something that's going to keep my interest for an entire novel. So for me, I'm putting this down, and I'm not enthused having read the first chapter. So the next book I want to talk about is Trespasses, and I read this book earlier on this year, and I thought I was really going to like it. It was reviewed incredibly well by some people on Goodreads that I follow and trust their reviews, and so I went into it fully expecting to love this book, and so naturally I have read more than the first chapter of it because I was a significant way into the book before I DNF'd it, because I tried to give it as much of a chance as possible. And whilst it's written fine, I can't say that this held my attention. For what is quite provocative, inflammatory subject matter, I mean, you have the Irish Troubles, you have an affair, both of which have the potential to hold quite a lot of emotion. I found it so dull. The protagonist is a teacher, and we get sort of the mundanity of her life, and whilst that sometimes works in a book, there has to be a hook that gets you through the narrative and propels you through a story. And I just wasn't feeling it. I just couldn't believe almost that I was reading something so boring that had been produced out of what should have been great, captivating subject matter. The next book that I read the first chapter of is Homesick by Jennifer Croft. I have to admit, I feel like Jennifer Croft should stay as a translator. She translates Olga Tokarczuk, who is one of my favourite authors. I absolutely love her books, and Jennifer Croft makes it possible for me to read Olga Tokarczuk because she translates it from, I think, the original Polish. And so whilst I love and appreciate her for that, I don't think Homesick is anything special. The writing is plain, and I don't really like that so much. So it's vignette-y. It will appeal to the more literary half, I think, of the Women's Prize readership, but it didn't work for me necessarily. I also think the subject matter doesn't really work for me. It's a sister relationship, one of whom is ill, and it's like a coming of age of these two girls, and that subject matter doesn't work. Sisters by Daisy Johnson would be a comparative relationship, and that didn't work for me purely because of the subject matter. I don't have a sister. I don't really understand or get that sort of relationship, and so it's not something that resonates with me or is relatable at all in any way to me. So I think, yeah, so I'm not sure if it's that or if it's just the writing that I'm struggling with, but as of the first chapter, I don't think I'm going to be continuing with this one. The next book that I read the first chapter of was Memphis, and I really loved this from the opening line. This the opening paragraph shows us in a Southern American porch, and there are plants and cats, and it just feels so cozy and homely, and I could see myself sitting on this porch in this big American ranch, and it just had all the warm, cozy vibes. Then we get introduced to three women. There's a grandma, a mum, and a daughter. And from what I can tell so far in the first chapter, we'll be following the three of them as we switch between those three perspectives as we go along in this novel. So I'm really looking forward to reading the rest of this novel and seeing where it takes me. So yes, this was a hit. The next book I read the first chapter of was Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. I really thought the immediate characterisation was fantastic. Straight away I'm in the head of the, I think, 11-year-old demon, and he is just a delight. And I started reading David Copperfield, but I haven't read it in its entirety, and I think that goes in the favour of those people who haven't read David Copperfield in that sense, and there's therefore no comparison going on from what I've heard from other reviewers and booktubers. So great world building, story craftsmanship, characterization. This is very much character-based plot, which is always a win. We always want character-based plot in our novels. We have our hero, who is Demon Copperhead, and so really this is hitting all the right boxes to be a potential winner. And Barbara Kingsolver has really done herself justice, I think, with this book. The next book on the list that I want to talk about, because I've read the first chapter, is The Marriage Portrait by Maggie O'Farrell. Now, this is something interesting that I have discovered with this book, in that this book read to me like a history textbook. It was very dry, it was very boring, and I think if you're not interested in the subject matter, you will find this incredibly difficult to get through. It is not historical fiction in that it is told very well. It's very much, yeah, it's very dry, and so for me, I was not interested in the time period or the characters, and so it just wasn't connecting. If you are interested in this princess's life, then go for it. But for me, this doesn't work, and highlights very much Maggie O'Farrell's I think where she lacks as an author potentially is in her storytelling, because if you go back to Hamlet, that was an incredibly compelling story, not necessarily because of Maggie O'Farrell's writing, but because of everybody's connection in some way to Shakespeare and this fascinating backstory of his son and his wife. And yeah, and so I think, as other reviewers have pointed out on Goodreads, the disparity between a great story being told by Maggie O'Farrell and then a not so great story told by Maggie O'Farrell really just highlights the failings of her as a storyteller more than it highlights the failings of what she's trying to talk about. The next book that I have tried the first chapter of is Pod. This was one of the ones that I hadn't heard of before, and it sounded great in terms of I like books about the environment, but then I was also incredibly concerned about the dolphin narrator. I'm not always sure about animal narrators. I feel like it can come across as quite gimmicky. I mean, just look at Glory by Noviolet Bulawayo. I mean, there are some serious pitfalls of trying to narrate something as a human being from an animal's perspective, and I must admit this lived up to my fears, in that I think that the dolphins aren't executed very well at all, and more shockingly than that, the writing. When I first started reading it, I was like, right, this writing is very, very simple, very basic. This is like a 10-year-old could comfortably read this writing. By the end, when I got to the end of the chapter, I'd reduced that down to like 7 or 8-year-old. I used to work as a teacher in year 3, and those children, for anyone outside the UK, those children are between the years of 7 and 8 years old. And I know children who could read this level of writing at that age. So it was shocking at how basic it was. I very much appreciate beautiful writing and good writing when I'm reading. It's part of the enjoyment for me, and that just isn't either of those things. It's not impressive to me in any way. Yes, I guess in a way you could argue, well, how advanced vocabulary wise can dolphins be? But actually, dolphins are highly intelligent. I think it would have been more believable if this was some incredibly verbose, lyrical, dolphin, because their intelligence is well known, and so they don't have to be speaking like a 7, 8-year-old child. and yeah, I found it tedious, slow, lacking any sort of specialness. So yes, nope, not that one. Next book I want to talk about is I'm a Fan, which I have seen previously on Instagram, and people generally have been liking it. I was intrigued going into this because I thought it was going to be quite well written, but I did have some concerns over the subject matter. I'm not massively into social media books, and I'm not massively into books where cheating is involved. And so I knew this was ringing several alarm bells, because I don't find either of those two things really that entertaining, and I read primarily for entertainment. So after reading the first chapter, I seriously struggle with first person narration, so stream of consciousness style writing, and that is what this is. It's just basically big swathes with no paragraph breaks of just some woman's like word vomit in her head. And it's, whilst the chapters are short, thank God, it's literally wall to wall text, no breaks, nothing, and just the internal ramblings of essentially quite an unhinged person. This person is a stalker. She is stalking on social media the woman who is sleeping with her boyfriend. And so it's one of those mind-numbingly tedious things where she's telling us about how she doesn't want to click on this woman's Instagram story too soon as it's posted, in like, you know, because the woman will know that she's watched the story like 4 seconds after she posted it. And it's like, God, is this all you have to write about? This is so boring. I don't need to know about, you know, this. Oh gosh, it's just tragic, and I don't find that sort of thing entertaining. It's cringy, just so not my thing. I think I would rather carve out my own corneas with a razor blade I fished out of the Ganges. The next book on the list I think a lot of people are quite excited about, and that is Children of Paradise. And the first 10% of this did really impress me. The writing's great, it's very readable, but it's also mature and is good, solid writing, but not to the point of being overly flowery. It's I call it fluid, and that you can appreciate it whilst also drinking it in quite easily and kind of flying seamlessly through this novel. It's very easy to consume in that sense, whilst also being well, nicely written. It's not really about anything overly exciting. It's literally a woman in a working as a cleaner in a cinema. She's tidying up all the food off the floor after the film has finished, and she's cleaning up the disgusting public toilets, complete with heroin, tinfoil and pipe, I believe. And yeah, it doesn't sound great at all, but I think it's about the smallness of her life, from what I can gather, and about the relationships with her colleagues who are also in this sort of job. So this is an interesting one. I'll be really looking to see what other people are saying about this book, and what everyone's general thoughts are, because I feel like this might be quite popular. The next book that I want to talk about is called Fire Rush, and this one sounded great. I don't normally read books that are about music, and the one thing that concerned me going into this book was that I knew I was going to struggle if it was going to be written in dialect, and unfortunately for me it is. And I know a lot of people will be able to read this book and understand kind of what's going on more than me, but for me certainly I really struggled actually comprehending, because I had to not only read the text, translate it into words that I understand, but then my brain was focusing so hard on doing that I actually couldn't tell you what happened in the 10%, because I was purely trying to translate, if you like, what the text said. So if you are familiar with Marlon James's writing and how he writes in dialect, and you know, you can really, it's almost exhausting not being from that and not speaking that dialect to then read a novel in it. It's almost like reading a work in translation, because you're having to be doing the vocabulary translation in your head whilst also trying to grasp onto actually the storyline and the characters and what's actually going on and who everyone is. It's now the next day and I have finished reading all of the samples. So I have some new ones to talk to you about before I get into the final rankings for all 16 first chapters that I've tried. So the first one that I want to speak about is Black Butterflies. And this I was initially excited about because it's set in Sarajevo during the war there. But actually I felt the context was very superficial and very shallow and wasn't actually what I wanted, which was understanding more about Sarajevo from a perspective and with more historical detail than I have already read in the past. So I've read The Cellist of Sarajevo, and along with studying the time period during my history degree, and so I came into it with a lot of prior knowledge, and I felt like this book really just skimmed the surface of what I already know, which unfortunately detracted from my overall enjoyment because I wasn't getting anything new, or my attention wasn't being held. Maybe if you know absolutely nothing about Sarajevo and the war, then this will be a good entry level for you. But I didn't find the writing was particularly dynamic or interesting either, and it all just felt very commercial and shallow and not well executed, unfortunately, on any level, on plot, on context, on writing. This was a huge disappointment, and I will not be going any further with this one. Next book that I read this morning was The Dog of the North, and this I think is just screams commercial fiction. You can kind of tell from the front cover that it's sort of, the illustration is of that ilk, and so this is about a kind of mature lady who is just going from crisis to crisis. Some reviews say that it's funny, other reviews say it's just ridiculous and a bit farcical. Again, the writing is just your standard commercial fiction writing. It's nothing special, it's nothing to write home about, and it's certainly not a book that's for me or one that I will be continuing with. On a more cheery note, the next book that I read this morning was the chapter that I read this morning was The Bandit Queens. And this I was intrigued about because I liked the sound of the premise, and it also delivered in the writing. So this was you're immediately thrown into the kind of combined brain of this group of women who are kind of all talking at once. So it is very discombobulating to start with. You don't know who's who. There's a lot of characters, but they're all women basically griping about their husbands. The writing is interesting. Certainly one of the better ones that I've read on this list. I can see why it's on this list, and I'll be interested to take it a little bit further and see if I enjoy the plot. And I can see why the judges chose this one for a prize like the Women's Prize. So this one I'm optimistic about this one. I think it might do quite well. The next book I read this morning was Stone Blind, and this was probably the nicest surprise. I have never read Natalie Haynes before, but her writing immediately put me at ease as a reader. I felt like I could relax, and I knew that I was in the hands of a great storyteller, someone who can craft a good narrative, somebody who the form and the structure of the writing is excellent. It makes it so much more enjoyable to read when the chapters are short and we sort of bounce between the things that she wants to highlight, and so it just felt, in comparison to the other 13 that I'd read, it just felt like I was being given a welcome break, and that I could trust her to know what she was doing the whole time. So this feels very accomplished. This is her second novel, I believe, and this one basically it's the story of Medusa. So she is She is raped in the Temple of Athena, which offends Athena greatly, and Athena basically banishes her as a result, which is a whole different conversation that I've spoken about with a few other people on BookTube, which kind of irks me. But setting that issue aside, this is a very incredibly feminist novel, very anti-men from what I've heard from other people, so make of that what you will, if that's something that you think you'll enjoy. In terms of it ridicules the traditional male hero in the book, well, in the Greek myth. Yes, in terms of the quality of the writing, this is a win. I absolutely recommend this. Certainly it is one of the strongest, if not the strongest, book on this list that I've read so far in terms of storytelling, aside from maybe Demon Copperhead. Now, Wandering Souls was a book that I hadn't heard of before this list, but on reading the blurb it sounded like a me kind of book, and it certainly is. The writing is lovely. It feels almost historical fiction, even though it's set in 1978, which I don't think counts yet as historical fiction, but it reads certainly like that, and we follow a group of small children who are all siblings, and they're going to basically take a journey from Vietnam to England because of the consequences of the Vietnam War. So this certainly sold me by the first chapter, and I think I will be continuing with this one. And yes, this was great. Very solid book on this long list. Recommend, give it a go. I think there'll be quite a few people enjoying this one. So after a very rocky start to my reading of this long list, where about 9 books in, when I hadn't enjoyed a single one, I was kind of questioning what was going on and what was happening, because it was just seemed to be going from bad to worse, and so I think my early reviews in this video when I was at the beach probably reflect that. But this morning I feel much better. It's still a disappointing long list as a whole. I feel like I feel like there's a reason that BookTube's predictions videos were so wildly different to what's on this list, potentially because yeah, I guess you essentially have 5 judges who are in their little bubble and can't really communicate with the outside world about the books that are eligible, and so they end up creating this little sort of echo chamber amongst themselves, and so they create I guess quite a warped list to what we would expect to be on there. Kind of like how on social media platforms, what you click on is what the platform shows you more of. And it's how things like Brexit and Trump happen, because people of those opinions then receive more data and images validating their opinions and backing up their opinions and strengthening their opinions, and it then creates its own, until that's all they're being shown on social media. And so I feel that kind of has happened with the Women's Prize. You have these 5 judges who are really solely responsible for what goes onto that list, and it takes them months to discuss these things, and they end up with a kind of reflecting back at each other the similar sort of themes and thoughts and clearly quality of writing, until they end up with a very different list from what you would normally suspect, what people expected to be on that list. Both on Bookstagram and BookTube, people I think were very surprised and certainly were not expecting the 16 books that were chosen. So that's my 10 penneth on why I think what happened has happened. And so I'm now going to get into my final ranking. So it's probably no surprise to anybody given what I said about it, but in 16th place is I'm a Fan, which I am not a fan, clearly. In 15th place is Glory. Again, I feel like I said everything I needed to say on that one. 14th place is Pod. 13th place is The Dog of the North. 12th place is Black Butterflies, 11th place is Fire Rush, 10th place is Homesick, 9th place is The Marriage Portrait, 8th place is Trespasses, 7th place is Cursed Bread, 6th place is Bandit Queens, 5th place is Children of Paradise, 4th place is Wandering Souls, 3rd place is Memphis, 2nd place is Stoneblind, and 1st place therefore is Demon Copperhead. As you can see, the books that I read today largely made it into the top 6. So I read Stoneblind, Wandering Souls, Children of Paradise and Bandit Queens all today, and they make up the majority of the top 6, which would be the shortlist. If I'm sure they won't. I'm sure because I am so vastly different in my opinions to the judges. I'm sure they'll probably choose the bottom 6. So the shortlist will be Fire Rush, Black Butterflies, The Dog of the North, Pod, Glory, and I'm a Fan. Just because they clearly are the complete. They like books that are the complete antithesis to the books that I like. But it's okay. We have the International Booker prize coming next week, and that's always an exciting thing to look forward to. Another prize, another opportunity to get invested in and enjoy, hopefully. 13 new books coming our way with that translated literature prize. Let me know down in the comments which book you're most looking forward to. Has my opinion changed your mind on any of these books? Potentially a book that I hated, what I said about it has made you think, oh, I think I might enjoy that one. So let me know if that's the case. Have you tried any of these books, and which ones are you enjoying and not enjoying? Which ones are you most excited for? And I shall see you in my next video. Bye guys.